As Colin noted, it's 25 years ago that I came to my first Pennsylvania Leadership Conference when I became friends with Fred Anton, and I still remember being on a panel, and Jim Panyard, whom many of us know, introduced me then as a young man with potentially good political acumen. Now, as we know, a lot can change in a quarter century. I'm not as young as I was, and there's been some question about my political acumen. I may know some history, but there are some doubts about me when I talk about what hasn't happened yet. 20 years ago, Sam Katz came and said, "I'm looking at running for governor. It's a crowded field. Can I win?" And I said, "Absolutely. Ridge doesn't have a chance. They'll divide up the vote. They need a Philadelphia man." So Sam ran and lost. 10 years ago, Pat Toomey said he was thinking of challenging Senator Specter. And I said, "Go for it. He's wounded and vulnerable. You can take him out and be on a national ticket in a short time." So he ran and lost. And about the only time this ever became a problem was 2 years ago when I appeared here, right at this podium at PLC, and said there was no question whatsoever Barack Obama would lose his job. Well, Barack Obama didn't lose his job. I lost mine. But a funny thing happened to me on my way to the unemployment line. I was happy to learn that Newsmax did not hold predictions that didn't come true against me. So here I am doing about what I did 25 years ago, still covering the White House, still covering Congress, still traveling in search of fresh political faces. In fact, along those lines, an article on fresh faces in politics, I've scheduled an interview with Nancy Pelosi's plastic surgeon. Now, we can talk all we want about disappointment and predictions that don't come true. It happens on every side. People who are passionate about a cause and feel strongly about things are sometimes going to deny facts about them and honestly believe what they want to happen will happen. So much did people loathe the President of the United States, so much did the opposite party become convinced their revulsion was shared around the country, they denied any evidence that this president could be reelected. That man in the White House is through, chorused his opponents, even though their nominee was a wealthy man who was awkward and seemingly uncomfortable with voters. They were convinced that the national tide would sweep him in. Well, it didn't happen. George W. Bush was reelected president. There was no President Kerry. But think about this. If 10,000 votes in one state, Ohio, had changed that year, so would history have changed. John Kerry would have been president, George Bush would have retired to Texas earlier, and Barack Obama would now be accumulating some experience in the Senate in his 10th year in office. It doesn't happen that way. But remember the rest of the story, as Paul Harvey would say. Democrats got up, they dusted themselves off, they figured out why the election went against what they felt would happen, and just 2 years later, they came back to win control of the Senate and the House. And then in 2008, they won the top office, and the rest, as they say, is history. Right now, emboldened by the loss that we suffered in 2012, encouraged by the national trend, conservatives stand on the precipice of rebuilding their movement and extending their cause to 2016 and beyond. Let's look at it. In the House of Representatives, thanks to the work of people here from Chester County and Delaware County and throughout the Keystone State, Republicans took control of the state legislature in 2010 and the governorship. And the great legacy will be a net gain in Republican House seats that occurred in 2012. All over the United States, The political Marshall Plan worked. The grassroots was revived, and governors and Republican control of both houses of legislatures paid off. They controlled the redistricting process after the last census, and as a result, the House will not only stay Republican in this election, it will be Republican for the rest of the decade. Let me put it this way. In just the last month, 3 of the most senior Democrats in the House all announced their retirement. Moran of Virginia, Andrews of New Jersey, Miller of California, Dingell of Michigan, who is the most senior House member of all and the longest serving member of Congress. He came to Congress in 1954. It was always thought that his son would succeed him. His son is today on Social Security. They're leaving because they know the House will stay Republican. Here's a fact you may not know. 19 House Democrats are retiring. In at least half of the seats, Republicans have an even chance of making a net gain. In 24 districts, Republican House members are retiring. And in virtually every case, the district is better than even money to stay Republican. What is rarely, if ever, written is that thanks to groups such as the Tea Party, thanks to grassroots conservatives, the counterparts of the PLC in other states, the likelihood is that the next Republican House member in an open seat will be more of a bona fide conservative than his predecessor. My friends in Chester County tell me that the Republican who has apparently wrapped up the nomination will be more conservative than Congressman Gerlach. This has happened before when Todd Platts retired over in York. His successor, Scott Perry, more conservative. All through the country, sort of conservatives are being replaced by hardcore conservatives. And here at PLC, it's called an upgrade. In the rest of the country, it's a political sea change. Let me put it another way. If you thought the last Republican-controlled House was combative and feisty and ready for battle with the White House, you ain't seen nothing yet. More importantly are the Senate races. Let me be honest with you. Pat Toomey should have had more company when he came here in 2010. I'm not going to go through it state by state or review the past disappointments, but because of some not-so-stellar candidates in the past and some stupid remarks by other candidates who were overall good people, Republicans lost golden opportunities to have a Republican Senate in 2010 and 2012. And admittedly, in 12, some real heartbreak came because of that national tide, which worked against some outstanding Senate candidates, people like my friend Tom Smith. Well, I tip my hat to the past, but I take my coat off to the future. This year, Republicans have their last and their best chance to win the magic 6, the 6 seats they need to control the Senate. Simply put, in the 3 seats where Democratic senators are retiring, in Montana, in South Dakota, and West Virginia, Republicans stand excellent chances of winning and lead in all of the polls. Now, normally my philosophy is that the only poll I ever truly trusted was John Paul, but people on the ground say the Republicans are running ahead quite strongly. In addition, in 4 states, Democratic senators stood steadfastly behind Obamacare, and now they're paying a price, in some cases trailing outstanding Republican opponents in Alaska, in Arkansas, Louisiana, and North Carolina. In Michigan, my wife's home state, they last elected a Republican senator in 1994, 20 years ago. And now, virtually all of the newspaper polls show Terry Lynn Lamb, the former Secretary of State, leading Democratic Congressman Gary Peters for an open seat relinquished by a Democrat. And just in the last 2 weeks, Senate races that were on no one's screen suddenly had developments individually which lead them to be very competitive and races to be watched. Colorado, Iowa, New Hampshire, and Virginia, where Ed Gillespie, the former Republican national chairman, is someone you're going to hear a lot about in a state that 1 month ago most Republicans wrote off. Overall, the opportunities are vast to win that magic 6. And I can't emphasize how much that would change the political landscape. Let's look at it this way. Imagine for a moment it was just not one half of one branch of government voting to repeal Obamacare or delay its funding until a replacement came in or fixes were made, but both houses of Congress. Think for a moment if the Upton Act, which takes the very words of the president, that if you prefer your health care policy, it cannot be taken away from you. Imagine if that were not only passed on a bipartisan vote in the House, but passed to the Senate. The president would have to veto this and so much else and explain why. The lines would be drawn clearer, the issues more obvious to people. That's how important having a Senate in Republican hands is. Now again, it should be emphasized, and Jonah Goldberg did this last night, Republicans cannot simply say there's a tide running against Obamacare and that tide will carry people in. I am through giving it up for Lent and permanently, believing that there is a national trend that will somehow roll over the flaws of candidates and issue presentation and take conservatives on to win. It just doesn't work that way. Margaret Thatcher said it best, that we have to win the battle of ideas before we win the election. And that's why it's so heartening to see Governor Jindal of Louisiana present a market-based health care reform plan, members of the Republican House, including several physicians, offering their own plan, not much different from Jindal's. It's not a bad idea to have competing plans with fresh ideas. But I still have to say, given the conversations I've had with people about the Affordable Health Care Act, about the loss of policies that they've had, about the cost that's gone up, I have to believe in the end, watching Democrats stand by this for some unknown reason, that the 1,200 pages in Obamacare will be one day remembered for Democrats as the longest suicide note in history. Okay. We've got some difficult days ahead. We hear a lot about how conservatives argue. You know what I mean. Economic conservatives dislike social conservatives. The Tea Party is mad at the establishment. The libertarians are mad at everyone. Well, it's not a problem, really, when one thinks about it. Having a grand coalition within a political party has worked for the Democrats. It will work for the Republicans. It will work for the conservative movement because we have a cause that keeps us together, and I learned it from a wise man long ago. He was a small-town lawyer like Lincoln, and he had a meteoric political career. At the time we last spoke, had his career not taken some unusual turns, he would have been running for his 8th term as a United States Senator. And I thanked him for a personal favor he did for me. And as I turned to go, he did something odd. He grabbed my arms with his hands, pulled me toward him, and said, "We've saved freedom abroad. The question now is, can we save freedom at home?" What Richard Nixon told me that evening are words I will never forget. They sum up what we as participants at PLC as conservatives stand for. Author M. Stanton Evans said it best, the theme is freedom. That's what we're about. Freedom to make our own choices, freedom to determine the quality of education for our children, freedom to do what we wish with respect for others. So therefore, let's go forward, be champions of freedom in this election, build a conservative movement, and always remember the admonition of the former French President Nicolas Sarkozy, to build is as powerful a verb as to love. Thank you, and God bless you all.